It's a three-man race for two starting perimeter quarterback positions for the Washington Commanders heading into training camp. And if Emmanuel Forbes can put the mistakes of the past behind him, his and the coaching staff's, then I think he's got a fighting chance to earn one of those spots. That and more on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated, here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through today. Every day, as I appreciate you coming through every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, subscribed for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast, please do so at this time. On today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the Washington Commanders cornerback room, what defense coordinator Joe Whitt Jr. is going to want from his cornerbacks, how it's going to play into Emmanuel Forbes shaking the bust label that so many people have already fixed to him. And we're all going to start it off with how Joe Whitt Jr. employs his cornerbacks and how that could play into Emmanuel Forbes' future with the organization. If you want to discuss that, anything we talk about here on this episode, or anything Washington Commanders related, all you got to do is send me a text message by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. From there, you text me, I'll text you. You'll get bonus content, answers to your questions, conversations, all kinds of fun stuff happening there. No apps, no hashtags, no downloads needed. You just text me, I'll just text you. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders today to become a Locked On Commanders insider. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Emmanuel Forbes, second-year Washington Commanders cornerback, is on the outside looking in when it comes to securing a starting cornerback spot for the Washington Commanders this season, but playing in Joe Whitt Jr.'s style of defense and having a new defensive back coaching room could turn things around for the second-year player. And to be fully clear, I have Emmanuel Forbes losing his starting job. Sam Fortier has come here from the Washington Post, said the same thing. And I'm pretty sure almost everybody out there watching this thing unfold believes that Emmanuel Forbes right now is on the outside looking in for one of these two starting perimeter jobs. And as we get into this cornerback deep dive, most of this conversation is going to be focused on the perimeter corners. Not that the slot is not important. It's incredibly important. But I feel like the slot is just a little bit more of a kind of a known commodity. We kind of know what's going to happen there and certainly could be surprised. But as of right now, that's kind of how the conversation is probably going to look to unfold. So the first thing we got to look at when we look at these perimeter corners and try to figure out who has the inside track, who doesn't have the inside track on how they're going to get these things is, what is Joe Whitt Jr. really looking to do with his perimeter cornerbacks, and how much of his statement of we don't have 11 starters, we have like 15, 18 or whatever. I can't remember the exact number he used, but basically so we got a whole lot of people who are going to be regular rotational players, regular parts of this defense, not just 11. I believe Joe Whitt Jr., we talked about in some other position group conversations, linebackers, defensive line, all that stuff about where some of those rotations could come in, how impactful those rotational players could possibly be. But when it comes to his perimeter corners, I don't think Joe Whitt Jr. is looking for a rotation. I don't think he's looking to do this by committee. He's looking for two dudes that can hopefully stay healthy, execute what he's wanting them to execute, and go out there and be his perimeter cornerbacks for the long haul. In Dallas in 2023, Stephon Gilmore, one of the perimeter corners, arguably the best perimeter corner for the Cowboys, played 94% of the defensive snaps. Deron Bland on the other side, 90% of the defensive snaps. So Joe Whitt Jr. is not looking to rotate his perimeter cornerbacks, all right? So we know that Joe Whitt Jr. isn't looking for rotation of players at cornerback position. So if Emmanuel Forbes is going to earn the right to give 90% plus snaps in this defense, he's got to prove to Joe Whitt Jr. that he can be a cornerback, not just in the NFL, but in his system and his style of play. And there's coaching for guys' strengths, but on defense, you can't really do that as much as you can on offense, right? We hear this team talk about coaching to their roster strengths, coaching the team strengths, all that stuff. On offense, if I'm an offensive coordinator, I can coach to my guys' strengths, right? Quote unquote, by saying, hey, I'm going to run this play because this play fits this player's talents really, really well. So, hey, Jaden, on this play, you're looking for Terry first because this play is kind of designed to really flex what Terry McLaurin does really well. The next play, we might run one that really is intended to flex Jahan Dotson's skill set. The next one, Brian Robinson. The next one, Jaden himself. The one following that, Zach Ertz. We go back to Terry, then we go back to Jahan, then we come back to Terry, so on and so forth. So I can kind of customize my plays to individual players and kind of customize my game plan on who's getting the best looks, who's getting the most work, all these things, right? As a defensive coordinator, I can't really do that, right? I can't call a defensive play and say, hey, look, we're going to call this coverage formation because it suits Emmanuel Forbes better and hides his weaknesses a little bit better. Because all the opposing offense is going to do is find the guy you're trying to hide and exploit him, right? So you can't really do that on defense. So when you talk about a defense scheming to their players, you can still do it, but you do it in a much more holistic type of environment, right? You're much more looking at your entire defense and saying, we've got a lot of speed up front. We got a lot of aggressive dudes. We got a lot of good man corners. So we're going to run a very heavy, aggressive blitz man coverage scheme because that's how you coach to your guys. Now, if this one dude over here is not as strong in one of those aspects of your scheme and your style as this dude over here, you can't just say, okay, we're not going to run that play anymore because this guy isn't as good at it. So when you're Emmanuel Forbes, not only are you trying to show Joe Whitt Jr. that you can be an NFL corner, you're trying to show him that you can be his type of NFL corner. And that's a little bit of a different road to go ahead and try to plow, right? So defense is much more interconnected. So I think that you hear kind of Cliff Kingsbury talk about like, oh, I'm taking pieces from here, I'm taking pieces from here, I'm listening to this guy, I'm listening to that guy, and we're blending it all together. And then Joe Whitt Jr. is a little bit more of a, I listen to people, but at the end of the day, you're going to do what I tell you to do. Because again, as a defensive coordinator, he can't just operate these things as individual levers. It's all kind of one big rope that he's got to pull at the same time, right? So that's, hopefully that makes sense. So when you talk about a defensive coordinator talking about scheming to his team's talents, he's talking about it, like I said, in a much more holistic way, not in an individual way. And if you're looking at Joe Whitt Jr. as a defense coordinator, he's looking for blitzing. He's looking to go man heavy, and man heavy is a relative term as well. So I'm going to go draft, I'm going to go sign, I'm going to go retain, and I'm going to go trade for players that fit that mold. And that is why our defensive conversations have been more Joe Whitt Jr. focused than our offensive ones were Cliff Kingsbury focused. So when you look at Joe Whitt Jr.'s defense, where he comes from, not just Dallas Cowboys, but the Atlanta Falcons, Green Bay Packers, Cleveland Browns, and again, he hasn't been the coordinator in all these places. You just kind of look at the school of thought that he's kind of coming from. You're looking for cornerbacks that need very little pass rush ability because the Cowboys don't blitz their cornerbacks a lot. In 2023, their leading blitzer last year was Jordan Lewis, who is their slot defender, not their perimeter defender. Perimeter corners basically never blitz in a Joe Whitt Jr. style of defense, from what I found. Deron Bland in 2023 led perimeter corners in Dallas with 4 blitzes. That's it. Deron Bland again led in 2022 with 10, certainly more than in 2023, but still not a whole lot. Jordan Lewis led all corners in Dallas in blitzing in 2021 with 8 of them. So we're not super worried about whether Emmanuel Forbes, Benjamin St-Juste, Michael Davis, Christian Holmes, all these perimeter guys, whether or not they can blitz from the cornerback position. What we are looking for, though, of course, is coverage, right? Dallas was in man coverage more than 30 other NFL teams last year, but still they were in zone 48% of the time, which ranked 31st. So that's how heavy of a zone coverage league the NFL has become, where being in zone nearly half the time has you ranked 31st in the NFL. But it shows you just how multiple NFL defenses have to be, and it shows you how multi-skilled NFL defensive backs have to do or have to be. In today's NFL, you can't just be a man corner or a zone corner. We had those kind of conversations in the past. You have to be able to do both. So in 2023 alone, Stephon Gilmore for the Cowboys played 268 man coverage snaps, 335 zone coverage snaps. Deron Bland, 253 man to 342 zone. And then on the Washington side of things, Emmanuel Forbes, 112 man to 160 zone. Benjamin St-Juste, 231 man to 342 zone. And in Los Angeles, Michael Davis last year played 122 man coverage snaps to 272 zone coverage snaps. So again, every single team essentially in the NFL is more zone than they are man, but you're still playing plenty of man. So you still have to be able to do that. And of course, you've heard the saying before, probably. If you haven't, I'll just tell you now, zone coverage turns into man coverage at a specific point. So when you look at the data, and you don't want to look at that alone, so we're going to definitely flesh this out more as we go, it points to Emmanuel Forbes having just as much of a chance succeeding in this game as anyone else, because he's still going to play a good amount of man, but he still does have to play a good amount of zone. And those struggles are going to be amplified when you're watching him because he's a first-round pick. Of course, his draft selection position is not his fault, but it is what it is. Now, not all man and zone coverage is created equal either, right? The pass rush absolutely matters and has an impact on the coverage. The better pass rush is, the better it helps across the board. The last time Joe Whitt Jr. was on a staff that had sacks per pass attempt ranking, that was the back half of the league. So worse than 16th was with the Atlanta Falcons in 2020. They ranked 17th. In that season, Falcons top corner AJ Terrell had a 41.1 man coverage grade according to PFF and a 69.2 zone coverage grade. So those man coverage grades can certainly be impacted by the lack of an effective pass rush or the lack of a top pass rush. So, but it's not all just on the front seven, right? You have the pass rush, The cornerback's got to be able to play off that pass rush, understanding where your teammates are going to be, where they're going to be attacking. If I'm attacking through this gap, we're attacking through this gap, what kind of lane does that open up for the quarterback? How does that impact where my receiver is going or is anticipated going? How does that impact my ability to cover? So getting the pass rush is important. Playing off the pass rush is even more important. But none of that takes the blame or the responsibility off the cornerback himself and how we evaluate them when it comes to being in a vacuum. Then, of course, again, how you reapply it to Joe Whitt Jr.'s style. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket seller of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. The prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. They've got killer last-minute deals that give you 60% off on the app, all-in prices, so you know everything going into hitting the checkout button, views from your seat, so even if you've never been in the stadium, you can see what it looks like before you buy the tickets, and they've got their lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets in the same row, same game for cheaper, Game Time will hook you up and give you back that money plus some. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. The next Washington Nationals home game, July 19th. If you want to go see them face the Cincinnati Reds, you can do that for as little as $18. But if you just can't wait to watch baseball in the DMV, the Baltimore Orioles are hosting the Chicago Cubs on Thursday. Also have the New York Yankees coming into town for a 3-game set right after that. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks again for being a Locked On Commanders, your first listen, your first view today and every day. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming through. Tomorrow as well, we will wrap up this series of looking at taking a deep dive into each position group on the Washington Commanders roster, how it fits into the new scheme, what we anticipate the new scheme to look like, the key players, and any additional considerations that we need to take. Of course, we only got one group left. That is the safeties. We will talk safeties on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, check out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel designed to bring you the biggest story all across sports, all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So today's episode is dedicated to the cornerbacks and more specifically the perimeter cornerbacks. Again, in the slot, Mike St-Juste still expected to kind of just be that dude. And I mean, you turn on the tape, and they said it when they drafted him, right? You turn on the tape, there's not a much more clear Dan Quinn / Joe Whitt Jr. type of slot corner than Mike St-Juste still. But when you're looking at evaluating cornerbacks, right? So we talk about the Joe Whitt scheme. We talk about the pressure up front, how important that could be for not just a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, but for all of these cornerbacks and improving their cornerback abilities and giving them a little bit of a better platform to provide coverage from. When you're evaluating cornerbacks, there's really a lot of things that you can look at. And there's a lot of resources out there if you want to learn how to get into evaluating. And I don't claim to be an NFL scout in the making or anything myself either. I've just, learned some things and picked up some things over the years, talking to people, learning from people, and those types of things. And there's quite an extensive list of things that you want to kind of look at when you talk about a successful cornerback, right? Size is obviously part of that equation. And that's a part of the equation that Emmanuel Forbes gets a lot of criticism in, which there's some that he can control. There's some that he can't control in that. Speed and agility, coverage ability, ball skills specifically, physicality, instincts, durability, right? There's a lot of different things that you can look at. But bottom line is all defenders in the National Football League need three things: speed, toughness, and instincts. All cornerbacks also need to have the ability to cover in man. They need to be able to support the run, and they need to have ball skills. Even if you're not intercepting the ball, when it comes to ball skills, you need to at least be able to deflect the ball, find it, track it, get in the way of the ball getting to the receiver. Obviously, you want the interception, so the more you can do that, the better, right? But at a bare minimum, you need to at least be able to get in the way of the football. So when we look at these skill sets, we look at these three specific cornerback skill sets with these Washington Commanders cornerbacks. All of them have enough speed. All of them are relatively tough enough to get the job done. And when it comes to instincts, that's the most finicky part of this whole overall player evaluation. When I look at Benjamin St-Juste, for example, I feel like with his instincts, the more he has to think, the more his instincts diminish. And I think that's true for a lot of cornerbacks, right? That's not like a Benjamin St-Juste specific type of situation. But when you look at the zone coverage, the zone scheme he was playing in Washington up until this season, there's a lot of moving pieces, right? It's a lot of, well, this receiver does this and you do this. If this guy does this and you do this. If your partner over here goes here, you go here. when the ball gets snapped, there's multiple things for these defensive backs to have to track, check, and read the same way. And when one person reads it differently, reacts differently than the other person reacts in concert, that's when things go awry. That's when wide open receivers happen, and it just happened way too many times. And when you turn on Benjamin St-Juste film, a lot of times, to me, it looks like when he's got to worry about what these 2 or 3 receivers are doing or what his other defender is doing, that's when things tend to bog down for him specifically. When he can just focus on his assignment, focus on what is it that I need to read in front of me, where do I need to stay, who do I need to go with, you see him play with a lot more confidence, and that's when the instincts show up a lot more. When I look at Emmanuel Forbes, however, his instincts to me look like they really got shot due to a lack of confidence. I don't know that we saw a lot of instincts when he started his NFL career, and I think that just kind of is a little bit of natural rookie nervousness. But then from there, he's getting beat up. He's getting beat up on the field. He's getting beat up in the media. He's getting beat up by the fan base. The coaches aren't doing a whole lot of stuff to really kind of help him out. They're trying to make some excuses, but they're not really out there giving him a whole lot of tools or a whole lot of help from scheming and coaching, right? And that just kind of snowballs the lack of confidence. And the more he lost his confidence, the more those instincts just kind of disappeared. And he looked like a dude who's honestly just kind of hanging onto a rope, hanging off the side of a mountain, just hoping not to fall. And then the lack of top shelf coaching. So when Forbes was dragging and the secondary was sinking, the scheme didn't change. The approach didn't change. It was basically just do better what I'm telling you to do instead of altering what you're trying to do to make it better for what your players doing. So that's where we get back to the coaching for your player skill sets as a group. This Commanders secondary, it's not like Emmanuel Forbes was the only dude out there struggling. Everybody was struggling yet until Ron Rivera took over the defense. Things didn't change at all. And by then, honestly, it was just too little too late. So the question here is, can Forbes get himself to trust again, right? That's how you'll see those Emmanuel Forbes instincts. When you turn on the Mississippi State tape, there are some instincts there. You see some great instincts that you can see there. The ability to attack the ball going downfield or going downhill, doing all kinds of things, anticipating what a receiver is going to do before he even does it. There is actually a good amount of instincts on Emmanuel Forbes' college tape that you don't see in the NFL because I believe a lack of trust, not just a lack of trust in himself to a certain extent, but also a lack of trust in the scheme that he's playing in, a lack of trust in the coaching that he's getting or not getting. So that's the instinctual part of this. Then you get into the weeds of the cornerback play and evaluation. You have to see these guys be able to man up, help and run defense, and play the ball in the air. So how do these 3 corners, these top 3 perimeter corners, they're going to battle for these positions, these 2 starting positions, Benjamin St-Juste, Emmanuel Forbes, Michael Davis. How do these 3 stack up in your cornerback specific traits? I'm telling you right now, I've got Emmanuel Forbes higher than you think. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, deep diving into the cornerback position, what we think we know about this group, what we want to know about this group, and what we need to see from this group moving forward. And we've talked about how the Joe Whitt Jr. style of play, or at least what we anticipate being the Joe Whitt Jr. style of play, could impact the cornerback position, how they marry in with some of the other parts of this defense, specifically looking at a guy like Emmanuel Forbes. How could that rebound really come through? How is he going to get used by Joe Whitt Jr. as a perimeter corner in this scheme? And then we just got done talking about some of the overarching overall character traits that you need out of a defender in the National Football League: speed, toughness, and instincts, right? And I think instincts is the biggest part where you saw Emmanuel Forbes fall apart. Benjamin St-Juste took a step back last year. So that's where you need to see them get better this year. But then on top of that, there are cornerback specific traits that you need to see on top of it. And those 3 being man coverage ability, run defense ability, and ball skills. Man coverage. So at the end of the day, so even though we just talked about this, right? We just talked about how last year the Dallas Cowboys defense, one of the heaviest run or man defenses in the NFL last season, still ran zone coverage 48% of the time. That's just how heavy of a zone coverage league this has become when one of your most man-heavy defenses in the league still is using zone basically half of the time, right? So you've got to be able to zone cover. But the thing about zone coverage is zone coverage always becomes man coverage at a certain point. Either you attach to somebody coming through your zone, or the ball's coming out, or there's only one guy there for you to cover. You're not just going to stand in open space. You're always fighting for work. You're always fighting for something to latch onto. So eventually, even zone coverage becomes man coverage, which is why every cornerback entering the NFL needs to be able to play man coverage to a certain extent. Man coverage is actually Emmanuel Forbes' strong suit. Benjamin St-Juste tends to thrive better in zone. The reason for this, in my perception, is that St-Juste is better at putting himself in position when off and reading the play ahead of him, while Forbes is better using his athleticism to latch on and carry a receiver through the route. The problem with putting a guy like that likes to shadow, like Emmanuel Forbes in zone, is that he can't really shadow until it's time. Knowing when it's time and how to best set yourself up for when that time comes is the hard part. That's where Emmanuel Forbes really struggles in zone coverage. At least that's where he struggled in 2023 at times when he turned on the film. For St-Juste, it's not that he can't shadow or he can't attach and run, because he certainly has that ability, but he's not as fluid of a mover, and he's a little bit more hesitant. He just doesn't kind of trust himself when he's in that mode as much as some other guys do, which is why I put him specifically a free safety coming out of the Senior Bowl, coming out as a rookie in the NFL from Minnesota. But that's a whole different story. Every day, as you've already heard me lament about how I want Benjamin St-Juste to be a free safety. Now, it's also why you're better route runners and you're quicker movers in their stems and coming in and out of the breaks, like DJ Moore, for example, last year against Chicago Bears. Sorry to bring that back up. That's why those types of receivers can make Benjamin St-Juste look a little foolish, because he really likes to have his eyes on the quarterback. When you're man coverage, if you're attached to a guy's hip and your eyes are going this way and he's going that way, you're going to be in trouble, man. When looking at Michael Davis's tape from the Los Angeles Chargers, he looks to me like he might be better suited in press coverage, press man coverage. The Chargers had him playing off quite a bit. Now, every defense coordinator will essentially tell you that whether or not they play press, whether or not they play off, is kind of a combination. Sometimes it's dictated, sometimes it's up to them. So I can't tell you how many times he chose to play off and how many times the Chargers made him play off. But I can just say that he does look a little heavy in his feet when he's backpedaling or when he's in off coverage. Definitely settles down a little bit, allowing receivers to really eat the cushion that he has to begin with. And then when in close quarters, he hand checks really well, turns really well, just seems to cover with more confidence. And again, that's where the instincts really start to shine. So for me, that kind of translates to saying he might be better off when he's in press man, or at least in man coverage, where he can kind of latch onto a dude and kind of ride him down the field. Now, not sure if that's what this staff saw on this tape when they decided to go pursue him. That's just what I'm telling you I saw. And in that sense, if you look at it like that, it's actually Michael Davis and Emmanuel Forbes that seem to be the two most natural fits for what we think the Joe Whitt Jr. defense is going to look like. And Benjamin St-Juste would actually be the third guy in that pecking order. But Benjamin St-Juste certainly brings a more consistent performance history as an NFL cornerback than Emmanuel Forbes. And he did show really extensive growth as an NFL cornerback last time he had really good coaching in 2022 for his position group. So for that nuanced part of the cornerback evaluation, it's really much more applying that to, say, rookie tape, or not rookie tape, but college tape, right? When we look at the college tape, look for that man coverage ability, look for that run defensibility, look for that the ball skills and all those things. In that instance, I still have Emmanuel Forbes ahead of St-Juste. I still have Michael Davis ahead of Benjamin St-Juste. But when you add in the consistency, when you add in the track record of even when the Commanders defense is not doing well, Benjamin St-Juste, you don't look at him and say, man, this dude is just, confidence is completely gone, all these things because the team is doing poorly. Whereas you turn on some reps from Emmanuel Forbes, and you kind of do see that lack of confidence start to come in and become a nightmare for the young cornerback. So that's, I think, where Benjamin St-Juste kind of gets that benefit of the doubt. I mean, that's why a lot of us on the outside looking in don't think Benjamin St-Juste's job is kind of in jeopardy. But I'll tell you right now, coming into training camp, if Emmanuel Forbes can shake off some of that, the confidence issues, if he can get better with his coaching staff, then he certainly has a fighting chance to get back into this race. As for run support, I think you got to put Emmanuel Forbes in the last spot there. For ball skills, again, I think confidence has a lot to do with it. But St-Juste, he's shown the ability to get some passes defense, right, to break up some passes and all those things. He's only got one interception on his record. Michael Davis has 8 career interceptions, and 1 or more in each of the past 5 seasons. Emmanuel Forbes had 1 last year. And while Forbes was known as a college ball hawk, hasn't really shown that ability in the NFL in just his 1 season. Again, all those other situations kind of contributing to that. But I still think you have to put Emmanuel Forbes' ceiling as a ball in the air type of defender above St-Juste, given that St-Juste has had this amount of time to really kind of show that ability and just hasn't really gotten there. And then I put Davis above there as well, because again, dude's got 8 interceptions in his career, St-Juste 1. So again, you look at the 3 nuanced cornerback, right? Man coverage, run ability, run defensibility, and interceptions, ball skills. You put Emmanuel Forbes and Michael Davis, top 2 of the 3 in 2 of those categories. You put Benjamin St-Juste and Michael Davis in the top category of actually all 3, and you put Benjamin St-Juste in the top 2 in 1. So if you're just playing that way, you would actually give Emmanuel Forbes a little bit of the edge there, and then Michael Davis would have the edge at the other side. But again, we anticipate that Benjamin St-Juste, and I say we loosely, I'm talking about me specifically, but a lot of people watching the Commanders right now still look at Benjamin St-Juste and Michael Davis as the favorites to be the starters, Emmanuel Forbes to be that second. Because at the end of the day, guys, you got to have faith in yourself. If you can't trust yourself, the team can't trust you. Emmanuel Forbes has got to show that he can find that confidence again, going back out there onto the field. So for better or worse, whatever we anticipate from Joe Whitt Jr. style of defense. Those are tape evaluations, getting in the room, getting on the practice field, getting on the playing field. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's what we're going to see in training camp. That's where Emmanuel Forbes, unfortunately, has faltered, which is why there's so much momentum turning towards the opposite result. We'll see what happens when training camp picks up. We are less than 2 weeks away, guys, from training camp. That's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Tomorrow, we're going to wrap up this position group series with the safety group. And then next week, we're going to start talking about some fantasy football rankings. We're going to start talking about some position group rankings. We're going to start talking about some of that kind of stuff before we hit our training camp preview series as we enter the end of next week into early next week. And then we got training camp, baby. It's right around the corner. Say it with me, celebrate, be happy, all of those things. In the meantime, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, drop them in the YouTube comment section or text me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. I'll see you next time right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.